Today's book is Johnny and the Birds. Johnny and the Birds by Ian Munn, illustrated by Elizabeth Webb. Johnny and the Catbird. Johnny sat on the old stone wall in the June sunshine. It was hot and still, and Johnny felt lazy. But then he spied a wild strawberry in the grass, and the wild strawberry made him think of strawberry shortcake, and that made him think of strawberry shortcake for supper. So he jumped off the stone wall and ran to the kitchen to get the berry pail. He went to the meadow behind the barn to pick wild strawberries. The berries were easy to find in the tall grass, for they caught the afternoon sun, and they were bright like little jewels. Johnny ate a few, and then he was just starting to fill his pail when he heard a little noise like a kitten crying. It sounded like, meow, meow, meow. He hunted through the tall grass, but there wasn't a kitten there. He looked into the trees, and he still couldn't find a kitten. Then he saw that the joke was on him, for the noise that was coming from a little gray catbird. The Blue Jays. It was very quiet in the grove. Mother Blue Jay was sitting on the 4 eggs in her nest to keep them warm. She thought she heard a little noise. She listened very hard. Yes, there was a tap, tap, tap. It was coming from one of the eggs. Then crack went the eggshell, and out came the first baby blue jay. Father Blue Jay was sitting on a branch above the nest. He too heard the tap-tapping, and he knew that he would be busy finding food for hungry mouths. Father Blue Jay saw Johnny picking berries in the field below, but he didn't make a sound. Nobody must know where the nest was, not even his friend Johnny, because if anyone came to see the nest, the old hawk might discover their babies, and the old hawk might carry their babies away. Father Blue Jay had just heard the second egg crack when he looked down and saw the shadow slowly moving over the ground. He looked up to see what was making the shadow, and there in the blue sky above was the old hawk himself. The old hawk was tremendous, and Father Blue Jay was very frightened. But he did a very brave thing. He flew to another tree and screamed a warning at all the other birds in the woods. Jay, 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 he screamed. Then, all alone, he flew straight up at the old hawk. He darted at him from above, and then from below, from the back, from the front, so quickly that old hawk grew dizzy, wondering where all the blue jays were coming from. And he was mighty glad to fly away. The old hawk didn't come back to the grove again that whole year. My, he thought, there must have been a whole army of blue jays there. The robins. Anybody see robins outside lately? Cocking their little heads looking for worms? Johnny saw little pieces of blue eggshell on the ground under the cedar tree, and he knew that the robins' eggs had hatched. The robins had come back from the south early in the spring. The day when they arrived wasn't much like spring, though, for the March wind was blowing and it was snowing. You could see how disappointed the robins were by the way they sat on a branch of the quince tree and didn't even make a sound. Johnny's father left the garage doors open so the robins could sleep under the garage roof that night. But the next day, when the snow melted and the air felt warm, the robins acted very happy. They flew out of their tree and sang over and over again, cheer up, cheer up, cheer up, cheer up. Pretty soon, they started to gather little bits of dry grass. They carried them to the cedar tree in the meadow and stuck them together with mud and made a nice round nest of them. Then Mother Robin laid 5 beautiful blue eggs in the nest and sat on them for days to keep them warm. Once in a while, she would leave them to get herself some food. And once in a while, when she was away, Johnny had seen the 5 blue eggs, and now they were hatched. Johnny made a little whistling sound at once. The 5 little heads shot up in the nest, and 5 enormous mouths flew open. They think I'm their father with their supper, Johnny thought. Then Mother Robin arrived with her beak full of worms, and Father Robin came home and discovered Johnny standing there. Father Robin and Mother Robin jumped up and down and scolded with all their might. Johnny could see that they were frightened, so he went quietly back to his berry picking. The chickadees. Excuse me. The chickadees didn't go south when winter came, as the robins did. Instead, they stayed in their favorite field where the white birch trees grew and tall juniper trees sheltered them from the cold north wind. When they were hungry, sorry. That's not birds from outside. That's a bird clock chiming out what time it is. I think it's 6 o'clock. Okay. When they were hungry, they could push the snow off the red sumac trees and eat them. They could find seeds on the tall meadow grasses that stuck up out of the snow, and they could eat the little blue juniper berries high up in the juniper trees. When night came, they would huddle in the hollow of the biggest birch tree. But one day it snowed all day, and the north wind blew the snow into big drifts. Pretty soon the tall meadow grass was all covered up. Then the sumac seeds were lost in the snow. Then juniper berries were hidden, and there was nothing for the little chickadees to eat. Later, Johnny's father was putting on his high boots to go up to the barn. He opened the door, and a cloud of snow and 2 little chickadees blew into the room. "Oh, poor little things," said Johnny's mother. "They must be starved." She opened the inside door to the woodshed and shooed the birds into it. Then Johnny and his father shoveled a path to the outside door to the woodshed and opened it wide, and 8 more little chickadees flew in its shelter from the storm. Excuse me. Johnny's father hung a piece of suet from the beam, and Johnny sprinkled seeds over the logs of wood. The birds picked at the food until they couldn't hold any more. Ten little chickadees lived in the woodshed until the snow melted. They followed Johnny around the farm, perched on his shoulder, and ate from his hand without any fear. The first sound he heard every morning in his bedroom window was their friendly chickadee-dee-dee. Now on this warm June afternoon, Johnny could hear his little friends calling to each other from the juniper trees, and Johnny's pail was almost full of strawberries. On the way back home, Johnny passed the cornfield and saw Mr. Scarecrow with his tattered coat still flapping in the breeze. He'd been out here all by himself for over a year, thought Johnny. He remembered the day when he and his father had made Mr. Scarecrow out of clothes stuffed with hay. That was to scare the crows out of the cornfield. That had been the day when Johnny found the baby crow. Something must have happened to its father and mother, for it was flopping around on the ground, and it hadn't learned to fly, and it looked so helpless. Johnny knew that if he left the baby crow, the old hawk would get it. So he put the little bird into his hat and took it home. The little bird was so well fed at Johnny's house that it became a pet. Johnny named it Blackie. Johnny thought that when Blackie had grown into a shiny black crow, he would want to fly away with the other crows, but Blackie liked his adopted home, and he never did fly very far from the house. Blackie was sitting on the weather vane now, watching for Johnny, and when he saw him coming through the fields, he flew to meet him, shouting, "Caw, caw, caw!" And he rode all the way to the kitchen door on Johnny's shoulder. Johnny sat at the supper table that night, eating juicy strawberry shortcake. Everyone said how good the wild strawberries tasted. "They're delicious," said Johnny's mother. "Never tasted better," said Johnny's father. And "Caw, caw," shouted Blackie, meaning, of course, "I'll have another helping if you please." Wasn't that a sweet little book about Johnny and the birds? And we learned a lot about each kind of bird when we read it. So I hope that you have a wonderful day or evening, and you can learn about birds too. My kids used to like to listen to a recording of all the different bird calls as they were falling asleep. And then when they would be awake, after a few weeks of listening to the bird calls, they knew each one of the bird calls. So if they heard a certain type of bird, they could look in the direction that it was coming from and again be bird detectives.